If you were never privy to their past work, then you might wonder how anyone ever really cared for Square Enix as a company, especially considering their recent actions. But there was a time long ago where Square was just an ambitious group of goobers that didn't have a massive leech upon life itself attached to them, and bringing them down into a slow, arduous descent where you constantly wonder if it was even worth it for video games to last as long as they have, if it meant such beautiful and creative minds had to be merged together with the slimiest, hand-twistingly evil, unethical, and inconsiderate ignoramuses masquerading as a beautiful phoenix. The same people that didn't understand why they lost 2 billion yen when they announced their cloud-based platform, named after the evil mega-corporation from Final Fantasy VII that tried to kill the planet so hard, the planet itself had to birth creatures of cosmic horrors beyond comprehension just to expel the pathogen from its bloodstream. Meanwhile, the PR department is off Fortnite dancing or something and can't foresee any of these issues a mile away. To say that the merge between Square and Enix was one of the worst things that happened to the game industry as a whole probably wouldn't be too much of an exaggeration. And hey, maybe, just maybe, things could have turned out worse if they both never merged. But hey, I don't live in that reality. I live in the one where I can't play 2 of the games I was looking forward to this year because they're both microtransaction-riddled garbage. Sorry! There was supposed to be a game we were going to talk about. I think it's important to note that the reason so many people still pay attention to Square is because they remember the time when Square was independent, when nearly every game they released was filled to the brim with quality, from the SNES to the PS1 to the early days of the PS2. Squaresoft was a name to look out for all the right reasons. One of those reasons being their experimentation. See, a big chunk of their golden age took place during the era of the Super Nintendo, the point in time where most people who actually cared about making games finally knew what they were doing, and with that knowledge came the previously stated experimentation. An experimentation that, while still here nowadays in the form of certain third parties, indies, and Nintendo, back then it was everywhere, and suffice to say, this is an era a lot of people look back on fondly, not just for Square. I'll look back at it from the lens of someone born around the tail end of it, and just really appreciating all that was accomplished in that amount of time. And today we'll be doing a bit more appreciating with one of the many fighting games Square released at this time, Bushido Blade. But first, I would like to talk a bit about its developer, Lightweight. Besides Bushido Blade 1 and 2, they worked on Kabuki Warriors for the original Xbox, which was, yikes. And Wikipedia would have you believe that they also worked on the Kengo series, said to be a spiritual successor to Bushido Blade, but I'm not too sure on that. See, these games seem to be mostly made by Genki, a company known for their Tokyo Extreme Racer series and killing Spectrobes. They actually spent from 1999 to 2001 trying to acquire Lightweight until it was completely theirs. During the process, the first Kengo game came out, and afterwards Kabuki Warriors came out. Kengo has no mention of Lightweight, not even on the copyright information on the back of the box. The Kabuki Warrior prominently shows that Lightweight did develop it. Kengo 1 and 2, and even the last game in the series, Legend of the Nine, also has no mention of Lightweight in its logo crawl, but Kengo 3 does. This tells me that there is a bit of a mix-up with the information out there, and that Lightweight did not work on all the Kengo games, just the third one. If I'm somehow wrong about that, and granted, with how messy this whole thing is, I kinda expect that, please let me know, because one thing about doing videos on obscure games is that there is barely any information on these games that is readily apparent, or even fully correct, it seems. What I do know that is correct is that the last thing Lightweight worked on was co-development on Drive Girls, a game in which anime girls that can transform into cars fight robot bugs that are trying to destroy their island. And I just want that to sit at the back of your head going forward. The people who made Bushido Blade went on to help make that game. Life is very strange sometimes. And the last thing to point out about Lightweight is that they are currently trying to make a mobile game. It was supposed to have info about it during fall of last year, but it seems that that has been postponed, leaving this very pretty website of theirs to go quiet until further notice. Which, real talk, it's always kinda depressing to look at cult classics or other obscure games and find out that the people that made it either went bankrupt, fell out of the industry, or have just been meandering about without a clear direction. But let's not get too depressed before talking about the game. After all, it's better to celebrate what they accomplished than to mourn over what more could have been done. Either way, without further ado, let's reminisce on Bushido Blade. There was once a dojo known as Mie Kyokan. From the outside, it was viewed as any other dojo, but in actuality, held within its walls was a society of trained assassins known as Kage, sworn to secrecy and acting out their plans in the shadows. All until one member of those assassins fled the dojo, taking refuge in a labyrinth of a castle known as the Yin and Yang Castle. Fearing that the runaway would reveal their secret society, several members are dispatched to apprehend them and snuff them out. And whomever you pick out of the 6 available on single player is that runaway assassin. They each will have their own reasons for deserting and will have to mow down their once fellow assassins to survive. After defeating them all and taking out the master, you get one of the 2 endings for that character respectively. I'll go more into how you get these endings in the gameplay section, but just know, it's not as simple as beat everyone by any means necessary. The endings in question aren't bad either. In fact, they kinda surprised me with how well they close off the personal stories of the different members of the cast. Like Red Shadow, not knowing what to do with her life now that her role as a Kage is over, only for her to become a spy, still continuing the only way of life she's ever known. Tatsumi, realizing that he wasn't killing in self-defense, that secretly he really enjoyed the thrill of killing and now aims to keep getting stronger so he can get better and better at it. And then there's Black Lotus, who after realizing his role as a samurai is over, commits seppuku. And his part 2 reveals he left a love interest behind. What the heck, Lotus? Oh, I'm sorry, James. So yeah, the endings are pretty alright. Though Jesus, seppuku in a PS1 game, kinda hard to believe, honestly. Bushido Blade is quite possibly one of the most unique takes on fighting games at the time, which is ironic considering how its main draw is how realistic it takes itself. See, unlike most fighting games, when you slice through your opponent with a sword, that's it. You cleave that sword through them just right and they're out like a light. However, in an even more brutal fashion, you can wound the opponent by slicing at their arms or legs, making them limp, crawl, swing at you with a dead arm, or just let their free hand lay limp as they desperately try to take you down. There's no time limit, no health gauges, not even any music. Just the sounds of the environment around the 2 warriors and the mind games both of them play as they take calculated strikes to dismantle and destroy their opponent. As you'd expect with a game that involves a bunch of different kinds of samurai assassins, you take different stances to not only dish out attacks, but to help deflect incoming attacks. You also have a variety of weapons you can choose, and each character does better with certain ones than others. Like, Red Shadow isn't going to be doing too hot if you give her a broadsword or sledgehammer, but give her a saber or longsword and she's cutting like a master. One that'll easily get through the storm. What the? Cowards can go no further? What are you roasting me for? I beat him! This is another mechanic, the Bushido's Code. See, as the game's namesake implies, you are meant to fight honorably, meaning no killing people when they're on the ground, no throwing pocket sand to blind them, no stabbing them in the back if they run away, and no killing them as they are bowing or talking at the start of fights. Doing any of these dishonorable acts will cut your playthrough short, berating you all the way. Besides that, just simply win every fight while keeping true to the code, and that'll get you the first ending. And you might wonder, wait, what? Then how do you get the second one? Well, you start a new game, and against the first opponent, you start running. Ooh! And you keep going. After running through the entire castle grounds, reaching areas that you probably haven't seen before, and being surprised that all of this is interconnected and only segmented with load times, you make your way to this well right here, and you jump in, sending you down a different series of fights to do. It is very important to note that the enemy cannot hit you once during that entire sprint. If they so much as graze you, you gotta start over. But if you accomplish this, then after fighting Master Hanzaki, you get an extra fight against the true final boss, the embodiment of the cursed sword Hanzaki was wielding, Kendachi. And only after doing all that do you get your second ending. Yeah, it's kinda silly, but it's also kinda neat. But story mode is not the only mode that this game has. There's your standard versus mode, of course, where you and a friend or CPU can duke it out. There's training mode, which, just a word of warning, make sure that if you've made any progress that you save before going into this mode, because once you're in training mode, you can't get out of training mode. Press every button combination you can, it will not work. There is no way to get back to the main menu without resetting the console, and that's kinda dumb. Even if it's supposed to be a way of showing discipline akin to the other ways and themes of Bushido, this is still a game. I would like to maybe, you know, try out a different weapon or something. I mean, it's not that bad once you're aware of it, but if you do a couple playthroughs of story mode, get a few endings, and then decide you want to test something out in training mode, this definitely didn't happen, and I definitely didn't lose all that progress, by the way, well then you just lost all that save data. Because while this game does surprisingly have auto-saving, it bafflingly comes out of the box with it off. So if you're not thinking about it, you can still make this mistake by just forgetting about it, or acting without thinking. Again, not a deal breaker, but man, is that a really outdated design choice. Even at the time it was outdated, because tons of fighting games at this time still gave you an exit option or a pause menu period. Anyways, next is Slash mode. It's a survival mode where you are swarmed by enemy after enemy one at a time, gradually getting more difficult as it goes on. You get a checkpoint after every 10 enemies, and this lasts until you can defeat 100 enemies in all. However, if you beat all 100 enemies and you don't die once, you unlock Katse. You know, gun. Unfortunately, you can only use Katse for versus mode, and I know, I'm bummed out too. You ask someone to go through 100 enemies without dying, and I can't even take the only secret character in the game back through that very same mode just to get some cathartic payback? Oh well. Next up is POV mode, which is exactly what it sounds like. They made a first-person mode for if you really wanted to feel like you were a real Bushido fighting for your life. There's a movie viewer where you can watch all the FMV endings that you've unlocked, and finally there's Link mode, which unfortunately isn't a 3D action platformer version of Bushido Blade, but is instead just an option to use the PlayStation Link cable for versus matches. Something that I think barely anyone was able to do back in the day, since this required you to have 2 PlayStations, 2 copies of the game, and 2 TVs, not to mention the space for all of that. Why did Sony think this was a good idea? Why did game companies keep humoring this dumb idea when by 1997, most stores just stopped selling the cable altogether? Who knows, but it was an option. Bushido Blade is another great game that made up that beloved era of Squaresoft, but while it was critically acclaimed at the time, it never did crazy numbers, and isn't really talked about as often as other PS1 games. And I think I can understand why. Look at it this way. Bushido Blade initially came out in March of 1997. That's 1 year after X-Men vs. Street Fighter, 1 month after Street Fighter 3, and the same month as Tekken 3. Heck, Soul Edge was out for 2.5 months at that point. In comparison to all those games, Bushido Blade probably looked like the most boring thing you could ever play at the time. A grounded, precision-based fighting game where one hit either meant death or an injured limb. No hyper combos, no recognizable characters, no special moves, barely any music, and no Gone? That's what people bought Tekken 3 for, right? I would not be surprised if tons of people just couldn't get into this game. This is a very love it or hate it kind of game. But if you couldn't tell by this video, I recommend that you try it out if you're interested. Now, this game did get a sequel, one that miraculously made it over to the West, and as you could tell by the runtime of the video, we're not going to be talking about it today, but it will be something I definitely want to talk about sometime in the future. For now though, thank you all so much for watching this, and do let me know if you have any thoughts or memories of this game, but only if you want to. Make sure you all be safe out there, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Special thanks goes to my first $5 patron on Patreon, B17 Balder. Thank you and the rest of my patrons for being so unbelievably generous. I hope you've been enjoying what I do, and I hope to keep making stuff that not just you, but everyone else can enjoy as well. Till next time, take care.